The story I'm going to tell you is about a nature reserve which is pretty close to my house. When I was a younger boy, me and my grandfather would walk through the reserve an awful lot, and we would see a total abundance of animals. Deer, sheep, and a goat or two were a common sight. He'd always warned me that if I heard the loud screech of a bird, to hide in the tall grass or behind a tree as quick as possible. My grandfather passed away 5 years ago, and out of all the stories he told me, the one about that screech fascinated me the most. I'd never seen any larger than life birds, except the odd eagle or hawk which, when I was younger, seemed massive. That, however, changed. Last summer, whilst walking through the reserve, which, while I knew it like the back of my hand, I still greatly enjoyed, I noticed that the larger animals were more shaky than usual. These animals had seen their fair share of people, daily, and had no need to fear man. There's a woman who lives next to one of the valleys. She owns several horses, and she had told rangers that she had been finding them quite some distance away from their pens, completely devoured. Whatever had killed and eaten some of her horses would have to be massive in size. I unfortunately saw what I believed to be the culprit. At first, I thought it was part of a tree. I soon realized it was not, and began watching in fascination. After some time it flew away, almost taking several tree branches with it. I'd estimate its wingspan to be 20 to 24 feet long. I never heard it screech and have not seen it since.
Same Anon is. Also been here 10 plus years, so here is a story for you. Around 2013 I was at university and spent the summer break at my then GF's parents' house. They lived closer to where I was working and they had a lot of room. Her grandpa had passed earlier on in the year, but her house began experiencing your typical ghost hauntings seemingly out of nowhere. We're talking thrown objects, moving items, footsteps, moving shadows, phantom phone calls with static on the other end, full-body apparitions starting to manifest themselves. I was tapped on the head and back on 2 separate occasions. All this started happening around May and just ramped up as summer went on. Be me hanging out with GF and GF's sister while her parents are out on a weekend trip. Hey gang, let's ghost hunt this bitch. Invite a couple friends over so we have a group of 5. Set up an area in the basement, turn the lights off in the entire house aside from a couple candles. Set up a recorder for EVPs and I download this app for ghost hunting. Gimmicky but has a built-in EMF detector and comes with a voice box function. It's not your typical voice box that scans through radio channels though. The theory is a spirit can manipulate the device and it will say a word like a spoopa speak and spell. We begin. First 30 to 45 minutes nothing happens. EMF readings low. App will randomly say words like cookie or shoe every once in a while, but that's it. Suddenly there is a shift in the air. EMF starts to spike and the air gets heavy. Hard to explain, but there was just tension in the air and felt weird. Don't say anything about it or the EMF climbing, just monitor while others take turns asking questions. GF speaks up, is it just me or did the atmosphere change all of a sudden? Do you feel that? Everyone agrees. Friend stands up to go use the bathroom, which is upstairs. Follow his footsteps and as soon as he reaches the hallway where the bathroom is located, the app speaks hallway. Lots of oh shits and jokes that my buddy is going to get ghosted. He returns and we continue on. Air is still heavy at this point. So how did you die? App speaks again like 20 seconds later. Famine. You know you're dead, right? Why don't you just move on? App can't. This continues on for a short period where we're getting responses within 20 to 30 seconds. Some direct answers, some others don't really make sense. Eventually it slows down and the responses stop. We've been at it for an hour, so we start wrapping up. Once in a while it'll speak something, like somebody in the group banged their foot on a table and the app speaks foot. Eventually we just go on with our night hanging out and nothing really happens after that. The house will still have little bouts of activity here and there from what I've heard. We broke up, but it's slowed down. But when we were all there we were always talking about it and thinking about it, and I think the more you focus and put energy into whatever it is just ramps up the activity, sort of like a tulpa. I mean, you have 5 people sitting there intently focusing on this one thing and then it just blew up all of a sudden. Years later we were staying the night for a few days. I woke up to my GF shaking and smoking a cigarette out the window. She was just scared as all hell. Apparently she woke up to the lights flickering on and off in the room, and she looked over to the far corner and said there was some old man with grey long scraggly hair just standing there, and then he disappeared. Like 2 nights later I woke up to the lights flickering on and off, but I just noped and rolled over and went back to sleep. I was not going to look over and see that fucker standing there, lol.
I'll start. Florida. 2005. AM 14. Me and my family had moved to a new house in a rural neighborhood. Place was great, all of the neighbors were good people, the kind that would give you the clothes on their backs. They brought over some welcome gifts. Pretty standard stuff, homemade dishes, and the like. After every one of them dropped off the stuff they had, I saw one of our neighbors, an older man around 50 with graying black hair and blue eyes, pull my dad aside to talk about something. Being the nosy little shit I was, I eavesdropped on the conversation. He started talking about how the area was nice and all that, but that stuff could get weird around here. Said that there were a lot of strange noises the other neighbors heard on the space behind our backyard. Apparently, the family to the left of us had seen something crawling over the privacy fence from our backyard about a month before we moved. Alright PT. 2. Said they were grilling out back when they heard the fence rattling like it was being grabbed and shaken. One of them went to investigate in case of squatters, aka peek over fence. Old man gives the description the neighbor gave him. Amber-colored fur, around the size of a Dalmatian, but no tail. Dad chucks it up to some weird mud living back there. Old man says to be careful, since there had been some stray dog sightings in the forest behind us. Afterwards, Dad asks me to go check out back to make sure that there isn't anything back there now. Open the gate and see a oval-shaped hole in the ground about 1 feet deep and 4 feet wide. There's a bunch of leaves and amber hair in the center, but it looks like it's been undisturbed for a while. No footprints in dirt or signs of life like prey remains or crap. Tell Dad. He says since it looked old we probably didn't need to worry. Been living there about a week now. There were some weird howls in the woods behind our house. Doesn't sound like a dog or anything else I'd ever heard. Kinda like a chimp's yell and a hissing cat mixed together. Go to backyard to see if there was anything back there. See a 4 feet tall mass of fur sniffing around chicken coop. Its fur is the exact same color as what I found in the hole, just as shiny too. The air smelled like a mix of rotting fruit, raw meat, and stagnant water. I accidentally smack my elbow on the door frame and it perks its head up to look in my direction. Its face looks like a mix between an orangutan and a deer. Has weird droopy ears that look like if you tried to turn a human's ears into a rabbit's. Lets out a shrill screech that sounds kinda like a cat yowling. Climbs a tree in the corner of the backyard, hops over the fence and books it into the forest. Close back door as quietly as possible. Book it upstairs and wake my dad up. Tell him that there was a monster in the backyard. He assures that I was just seeing things wrong because it was so dark. He says that if we fill in the little nest hole, spray the yard with something, it probably won't come back. Next day Dad wakes me up so I can help him fill in the nest hole. We finish filling in the hole and my dad hands me a spray bottle full of some weed killer. He said if we masked its scent it would be less likely to come back. Don't really know if there's any truth to that, but okay. Absolutely douse the perimeter of the fence in weed killer. Nothing happens for like 2 days. I'm at home alone because my parents had to rush to go see uncle in hospital. Apparently he had a heart attack while working and was in the ECU. Before they leave, Dad gives me key to gun cabinet. Dad is kind of paranoid about someone possibly breaking because we were new to the area, and although the neighbors were nice he didn't want to take a chance. I've only shot a few times, but Dad taught me a lot. He says that if anything happens to get the revolver in the bottom of the cabinet. I hug him and my mom and they leave. For most of the day I kinda just lays about until around 7 p.m. when I hear something scratching against wood. Go to backyard, see the creature from a few nights ago trying to rip off the door to our chicken coop. I take a moment to soak in this thing's full appearance to be sure it's not a dog. It's on two legs and I can see that it clearly has hands on its front limbs. They were beige and leathery looking, really bony and long too. Each finger had sharp little nails that were slightly curved upwards. If I had to guess, they were around an inch long. Its legs were very similar to a human's but covered in fur and a lot slimmer. Its feet were about a foot long and arched like a person's as well, but they had the same nails as the hands but larger. I close the door quietly enough to where it doesn't notice, as it's too preoccupied with acquiring KFC. Sneak upstairs and unlock gun cabinet, grab the revolver Dad told me to use and an entire 40-round box of .357 with it. Load 6 rounds into the cylinder. Rush back downstairs and open back door just as the ape thing rips the chicken coop door off its hinges. Fire off a round and plug it in the left ass cheek. Lets out one of the most blood-curdling screams I've ever had the displeasure of hearing. Still sounds like an ape and cat mixed together but at max volume and 10 feet away. It grabs one of the hens from inside the coop and chucks it at me. Poor bird barely misses hitting me and splats against the wall next to me, covering the outside lamp in blood. It lowers itself to all fours and tries to rush me. Before it gets within 5 feet of me, I fire off 3 more rounds and miss 2 of them but manage to peg it in the right arm. Arm starts bleeding like a faucet and the thing looks like it's scared shitless. Hobbles away towards a tree and struggles to climb it in an attempt to escape. It's smearing blood all over the tree trunk and it starts to make a hooting noise. Hear rustling in the woods as I try to reload the revolver. Another one scrambles out of the woods behind the house. New ape creature is grabbing the injured one and trying to drag it away from the yard. I finish reloading the revolver and fire all 6 rounds in quick succession. Hit the already injured one in the gut and get the new one in the hand and leg, miss other 3 shots. Reloading again but they get away, doubt the first one survived but the second one would probably be okay. I slump down after the adrenaline from the encounter wears off. I'm breathing roughly and my heart feels like it's going to burst out of my chest. Hear neighbor's door open, they climb the fence to see what all the commotion is. They check me over to make sure I'm okay. Neighbor family's mom stays with me for a moment until old man neighbor comes through backyard gate. Asks me to tell him what happened. I explain and he tells me that although those things sound like something from a myth, he's seen his fair share of weird stuff. He asks me if we have a house phone and I tell him yes, and he asks me if I know either of my parents' phone numbers. I gave him the number to my dad's shitty Motorola flip phone. He calls my dad a half-true explanation of what happened. Tells my dad that there was a black bear in the backyard and it broke into the coop, but that I shot it and it ran away. Dad says he'll be on his way to come pick me up. Ask old neighbor bro why he didn't tell the whole truth, says that not everybody is keen to believe in that sort of stuff and he doesn't want either of us to be seen and nutty. Old guy makes me something to eat at his house while we wait for my dad. Starts telling me about how there's a lot of strange things in the world. Says that those things will probably leave us alone now since they've been hurt so badly. Tells me to be careful from now on and that if something happened while my parents were away to come to him. Hear honking outside. Dad pulls up into old guy's driveway and comes and asks me if I'm okay. Tell him I'm fine and that I'd rather him stay home since I didn't feel safe alone after that. He says okay and we go back to our house and check on birds. All are okay except for the one the ape thing used as a softball. Me and Dad put door back on hinge and go to sleep. Didn't see the ape things again, but I could hear them yelling in the forest every once in a while. I would also find rotten fruit and small dead animals thrown over the fence all the time. I haven't seen them but they're there for sure. That's it for that story though. My dad was a believer, so by proxy I was a believer. At least, I was when I was a kid. He had stories relating to almost everything, whether it was a haunting of a person, a place, or a fateful night with a Ouija board that changed his life for a few years. To hear the story about the man in black, you can't start on that night, You have to go back another 2 or 3 years. My dad was 16 and his mother had met a man by the name of Bert Johnson. According to the two of them, he was the best thing to have ever happened to either of them by this point in their lives. He was an older man in his early 60s and had an old-fashioned approach to everything. The kind of man who was steady and quiet, who spoke little, but with conviction. Bert was a jack of all trades, and other than the small farm he owned, he also made money by taking on odd jobs. He'd take my dad and maybe my grandma, aunt, and uncle with him on some of these jobs to get the job done quicker, and teach a lesson of the importance of an honest day's work. It was at one of these jobs that it all began. Sometimes they would enter abandoned properties to strip the insides down, or check for anything of value left behind before it was demolished. This building was an old 3-story home built in the 1800s. My dad had brought his dog with them, its name lost to memory, but was surprised when the dog refused to enter the house. She'd whimper, growl, bark, try to pull away until finally she nipped at him and he let her go, and she hid under the truck and just looked up at the house. Once inside, it was obvious there was little to scrap out of the house, but they explored anyway, in hopes of finding something to make the trip worthwhile. On the 3rd floor at the end of a hallway was a pile of empty burlap sacks with the faint smell of death on them, like something had died there years and years ago. Curious, my dad poked around the empty sacks and found them to be covered in stains. It was then that he heard the sound of fingernails scraping wood right behind him. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up and he swung around to find nothing there. He hurried downstairs and decided to leave the 3rd floor alone. He joined back up with Bert and his family and poked around the rest of the house. While they searched around the 2nd and 1st floors, the occasional thumping could be heard from upstairs and the sound of something being dragged across the floor. This scared my dad, but everyone else thought it was my uncle upstairs, and that he had found something. That was until my grandma looked out one of the broken windows and saw my uncle sitting in the truck waiting for them. This spooked them, and my family went out to the truck while Bert went upstairs to check on the noise they had heard. It was outside looking up at the house that my dad thought he had caught a glimpse of a figure in the doorway to the balcony in a full clan outfit, complete with hood. A funny thing to think of when you think of ghosts in bed sheets, but this was nothing to laugh about. After a couple minutes, Bert came back out and told them he couldn't find anything upstairs. As he got closer to the truck, everyone was startled by a thump from the house. Bert jumped and turned back to the house when my dad's dog growled angrily and bolted into the house barking. My dad said you could hear the dog start up the stairs, and after a few seconds all you could hear was some loud yelping and then silence. Bert went back into the house, followed by my dad, while everyone else waited at the truck. They searched the first 2 floors calling for the dog and then climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, where they saw the dog laying on the pile of old burlap sacks at the end of the hall. As they got closer, they noticed the dog wasn't breathing. Its throat had been slit. Bert and my dad looked at each other and ran out of the house, jumped into the truck, and drove as fast as they could away from that house. A few days later, Bert and my dad came back to get the dog to give it a proper burial, but when they went back to the burlap sacks, the dog was gone, and all that was left were fresh stains on the cloth. As they drove away, my dad looked back one last time and caught another glimpse of the same hooded figure in the doorway before the house disappeared behind the trees. A couple years later, my dad is 18, and he and his buddy are drinking in his buddy's house. It's getting late, and the moon is full, and my dad suggests pulling out the Ouija board and having some fun. So, fortified with some liquid courage, they get the board out and my dad decides to call out the ghost who killed his dog 2 years ago. They place their hands on the planchette and called the spirit. This night though, the spirit was not willing. After identifying itself as the ghost my father wanted to speak to, the planchette moved quickly again and again to goodbye and no. Still he would not be deterred by this. They continued to ask questions and make demands on the spirit until finally the planchette launched across the room and hit the wall. Even then it was not enough. My dad and his friend laughed and grabbed the planchette off the floor and a couple more beers from the fridge and returned to the Ouija board. They sat back down and placed their hands on the planchette again. As the piece moved to hello, the two asked if it was the same ghost as before, to which it answered no. Deciding to have some fun with this new spirit and see how far they could go this time, they asked who they were speaking to. The planchette slowly moved across the board with purpose, spelling out the words, something else. With this, the planchette ripped itself out from their fingertips and raised into the air, chasing them around the room until finally they were chased out of the house. Too scared to go back in, they jumped into my dad's car and drove to another friend's house to get away and sleep it off. This was the beginning of the visits from the man in black. The next day, my dad and his friend returned to the house to find the planchette sitting on top of the Ouija board as if nothing had happened. They boxed it up and burned it outside, not content with simply throwing it out. That night while watching TV, they heard a knock at the door, and when they answered it, no one was there. This continued every night after. Whether they were together or not, there would be a knock at the door, but when they answered, no one would be there. After about a week, they noticed the knock always came at the same time every night, 9:32. So they decided they would crash together, and just before 9:32 they would watch out the window to see who was knocking. That night at 9:30, while watching outside, they noticed a man in a black suit and a fedora pulled low standing beneath a street lamp. They couldn't make out his face, only that his skin was sickly pale. As time ticked forward, he began to make his way toward the house, and at 9:32 they watched him knock on the door. Both rushed to open the door and catch the man standing there, but when they opened it, he was gone. The next night they decided to repeat their attempt to catch the man in the act and teach him a lesson for messing with them. This time one of them would keep watch at the window as the man in black knocked, and the other would stand at the door ready to pull it open at the sound of the knock. They were sure there was no way this could fail, but at the sound of the knock, the one keeping watch blinked and the man was gone again. The two tried this technique a few more times, sometimes using other people to keep watch, or open the door at the sound of the knock. Each time the person, or people keeping watch, blinked no matter how hard they tried not to at the sound of the knock, and each time the door would open to the sight of nothing. Having met nothing but failure at these attempts, the two decided to spend the night in separate places. One would drive upstate to his brother's, and my dad stayed with my grandma. There was no way the man in black could be in both places at once. That night they spoke on the phone while each keeping watch, and at 9:30 the man in black appeared at both places, and at 9:32 there was a knock on both doors. This scared both of them into realizing it had to be something more than someone messing with them. They had their suspicions all along, but there is no way this could happen without it being something otherworldly. My dad decided to hit the road and drift across the country, picking up odd jobs from place to place, never settling down. After a while, some nights would go by without a knock at the door and he would feel a faint glimmer of hope and some relief, but this never lasted more than a night or two. The man in black was tireless in his pursuit. After the first year he lost touch with his friend, and no one back home was sure what had happened to him. His house was left unlocked, but untouched with his car in the drive. The police found no records of him traveling by plane or bus, and no sightings of him were ever reported. No one knew what happened, but my dad was sure the man in black had gotten him somehow. As the second year of wandering approached, my dad met my mom in a sleepy little New England town and fell in love. The two of them settled down and he found permanent work tending to a local cemetery before finding himself at an old felt factory. The nightly knocks had stopped after the two moved in together after I was conceived, never to be heard again. I can remember when I was little my dad seemed to watch the clock around 9:30, but as I got older he did so less and less until the thought seemed to never cross his mind. I asked him one night why he used to do this and he told me the same story. The old house, the dead dog, the Ouija board and the man in black. I asked why the man stopped coming, why the knocks had stopped, and he just looked at me with sort of a sad smile and would say, "He's gone for now." I grew up, and we grew apart, and as I began to live my life I lost my faith in many things. I hadn't given these stories any thought in years, and then a month ago I got the call from my little sister that Dad had died. I drove back home to lay him to rest, and family and friends gathered to share stories about a man who had meant something to each of them. I shared the story of the man in black with them, and the older friends and family there seemed to lose their smiles and laughter as I told it, while us kids thought it was a bit laughable, one of Dad's old ghost stories. At the wake though I could have swore I caught something in the corner of my eye by his coffin towards the end. A man in a black suit, wearing a fedora. I shrugged it off, as most were dressed in suits that evening. The next day though, at the funeral, I could have sworn I say the same man again, black suit and a fedora, standing by the grave. I wondered if my dad and the man had found some kind of peace with one another 25 years ago, and he had come to pay his respects, but when I tried to find him to talk after the service he was nowhere to be found. I spent one last day in a hotel before driving back to my apartment in the city, trying to get in just a little more time with the family I rarely see. That night there was a knock at my door, but when I answered no one was there. I figured it was one of my sisters or someone else trying to play a trick on me, so I thought nothing of it. I've been back in the city now for a week and a half, and every night now at 9:32 there has been a knock at my door. I hate to admit it, but it's starting to scare me. I put a webcam in the hall to try and see who it is, and I've seen him. The man in black. The same man I saw at the wake. The same one from the funeral. Every time he knocks the camera distorts and he disappears. I stopped opening the door after the 5th night and the knocks are getting louder. They sound angry. I've started praying again and attending church. God, I haven't done that since I was 14. I don't know how much longer I can take this. A priest is coming by tomorrow to bless the halls and my apartment. The clock on the wall just hit 9:31. I can hear the footsteps coming down the hall. What did he do? What has my father done?
So this story begins with me helping my grandmother by painting her house, due to the fact that this lady on a ladder would, at best, result in a broken hip, and at worst, a broken neck. I suppose she could have hired some professional painters, but she happened to live in bumfuck nowhere, the Dallas and our family has this annoying habit of staying poor, so hiring laborers would be too costly. Some more context, my whole family on my mother's side are Jehovah's Witnesses, or Jehovos, as I like to call them. I'm guessing this happened sometime after the family crossed the Atlantic. This has led to them becoming very strange, but nothing that would warrant serious intervention. For example, they are firm believers in the paranormal, and that invoking God's name can thwart off threats. All in all, after studying my family history, I decided this was a major improvement from our semi-nomadic, gypsy past, which had a tendency to give me the shivers thinking about the strange things that our ancestors did. Pick semi-related. It's the kind of bumfuckery you'd see in the Dallas. Arrive at my grandmother's house on a small lot of land in the middle of fucking nowhere. A few houses within eyesight, but the place is isolated. The only noise you heard aside from the noise you made was the neighbor's rooster in the morning. As soon as I get in the door, she tries to sell me on this month's issue of The Watchtower, a church-issued magazine. Yeah, okay grandma, so what parts of the house am I painting? She had just moved into this new house, so she gave me a tour. The first thing I noticed was how basic it was. She wasn't at risk of freezing, but there were patches with no insulation. Instead of paint on many of the walls, there was this ancient, cheap wallpaper that was fading. The whole place gave me this run-down and cheap feel. One bit that weirded me out was how strangely the house was planned out, or how little of it was actually planned out. There were seemingly random doorways and chambers, which was a little unnerving considering that many of these rooms served little obvious purpose. The house was a medium size, which was large considering it was only housing my grandmother and her 12-year-old Shih-Tzu. The creepiest thing about the place was all the abandoned shit everywhere. Books, clothes, rusty tools, kitchenware, children's toys, etc. Apparently her inner gypsy kicked in and decided all this leftover, worthless trash was acceptable. That or she needed a cheap place, and when the landowner said as is, They really meant as is. It becomes apparent that this trip to paint her house may extend a few days, so I can make her home somewhat respectable and habitable. Decide that I'll get started on the place first thing in the morning, seeing as I had arrived at about 8:30 and it was now nearly 10 p.m. So we eat dinner in the living room, and I get set up on the couch. About 30 minutes into trying to sleep, I'm ripped from my trance by the sound of footsteps down the hallway. "Grandma?" No response. I don't know what's going on, but I feel anxious, so I reach down to the floor and pull my pocket knife out of my shoe, as if that would be my lifeline. Something about this place just gives me bad vibes. While I'm fumbling around on the ground for my knife, I can hear some items being shuffled about in the impenetrable blackness down the hallway. I freeze. The fact that I can't see whatever this is causes me to get increasingly nervous, and I try to hold my breath. I know that if it starts coming towards me I'll be able to see it coming by the bluish-gray moonlight cast across the hallway in a slanted square shape. In the silence that follows, I can hear my grandmother snoring loudly down the hallway. Nothing happens for some time. Whatever it was didn't sound particularly threatening, just unexpected. As I attempt to go back to sleep, I can hear something softly pattering about in the attic, which starts to feel less threatening over time, and I eventually drift off. The next morning I ask my grandmother if she has a rodent problem, seeing as this house was anything but modern and critters could easily get in. "No rats or raccoons," she says. "That's interesting." We hear the crackling of her gravel driveway, and somebody in an 80s Chevy square body truck stops outside the house. It's the neighbor. He starts explaining how he heard some weird stuff last night, and he wanted to make sure that I was aware of the property lines. Apparently I upset the balance of this place by causing more than 30 mammals to be occupying the same 1,000 square yards, and now shit's getting funky. Weird, I haven't left the building since I got here. We'll keep an eye out. Apparently the last person to live here was another old lady that died about 10 years ago. At this point, I'm not too worried about anything, so I got about my plan to start painting. This goes on without incident for about 6 hours until I start painting one of the purposeless rooms. The step ladder is facing a wall, and I'm on the top rung painting the corner in between the wall and the ceiling. I'm thinking about some sophomore slut and painting away when I hear something above me that makes my heart sink. It's the kind of sound that is made when somebody makes a single step or puts pressure on one foot on a creaky floorboard, a kind of slow, moaning creaking noise. I have a mini panic attack, ditch the brush and jump off the ladder with my hands up. Fucking rats. I get a little frustrated that I just shaved 3 months off of my life, after exercising my heart like that over a damned animal. I'm calming down and inspecting the room for anomalies, until I see that there is a trapdoor leading to the attic from this room. Okay. Grandma, could you come in here? Proceed to ask her about the attic and if she has started to store things in here yet, as my cousins moved her in here. Really, I'm just a gigantic pussy and wanted her to be there while I checked it out. What a surprise, more leftover shit up here. Also, other leftover shit in the form of animal feces, confirming my suspicions. She's bringing in boxes for me to lug up here, when I find something very strange. A ring of dead rose petals, some symbols written on the plywood, surrounding some dust/ash and a plain wooden figurine. For some reason, this featureless literal stick figure gave me a strong feeling of dread. What the fuck? I started to get this paranoid feeling that I didn't belong there, and that I needed to get the fuck out of there. Immediately start telling my grandmother what I found, standing 12 feet above her and speaking through the square hole in the ceiling. Her eyes double in size and she turns white. She starts shouting at me to grab the doll with her handkerchief and bring it downstairs immediately. I got to grab the doll, but the feeling of dread intensifies tenfold. Experience this surreal feeling of torment, in which time slows and I fearfully gaze at the doll before grabbing it. This whole event lasted 5 seconds, but it felt like a minute. I bring the figurine down and head towards the living room. The front door is open and my grandma has clearly entered psycho mode. In the middle of the driveway she's already made a small pile of firewood and lit it with some matches and some kerosene. She shrieks at me to hurry up and throw it in the blaze. We sat there watching it burn and I felt a huge catharsis, like all my worries were alleviated and the threat was gone. As we watched it burn, I looked at the details of the figure. It had no facial features, and the thing was clearly handmade. You could see the chisel marks. About 5 minutes into just standing there watching this thing burn, we hear a loud bang. The front door had slammed shut and bounced open again, about 30 degrees ajar and creeping further. She invites me to come inside and pray with her. I don't fight her on this one. We come in and pray, and she does some sloppy but very serious blessings around the house. Decide to call it an early day, and we play cards, talk, eat dinner, and go to bed. Seriously jolted by what I saw up there, but I'm able to keep cool. The night was the same as last night in the sense that right when I was about to get some sleep I awake to some quiet noises in the darkness. This time my heart is about to jump out of my chest, as I realize this is most likely not a fucking raccoon. I'm staring down the hallway again, looking past my feet, waiting for something to step out into the moonlight and reveal itself. I can fucking feel it creeping back there. As I start to breathe normally again, I can see something in the light. The most horrifying thing I have ever seen begins a kind of hurried walk towards me. The creature is 5 feet tall and humanoid, with long black hair. I cannot distinguish any features. Its skin is as black as the void, aside from white glowing eyes. Before I can move it reaches me, staring me dead in the eyes inches from my face. I scream in terror. I honestly thought I might have just died of fright because I saw nothing. I realize that I was dreaming and that the hallway is completely black. It was a cloudy night. A hallway light is flicked on and my grandmother comes in to check on me. I'm speechless, but I can sense that she knows what happened. I decide to sleep on the floor in my grandmother's room that night like a child, but honestly I have never been more frightened by something I can't see in my entire life. The next few days nothing happened, although I never entered the attic again. My grandmother apparently had some elders come to her home and sanctify it, and she didn't mention anything else happening. She moved out of there about 6 months later, and I haven't been there since. The entity in question is something I have read about on /X about only twice. They all describe it the same way, short, black humanoid that moves quickly. I wish I knew what the fuck it was.
Be me. Mom worked for NOAA so moved around a lot as a kid. End up in Juneau, Alaska for a few years. Lived on Douglas Island so houses around, but not in town. Early 2000s so as kids we could go fuck around and do whatever we want so long as we were home by a certain time. Can't use the sun as a metric since in winter it got dark before I got out of school and at like 2 a.m. in summer, or if our parents called us over walkie-talkies. Springtime. Grandma had a stroke and went blind just before spring break so mom had me stay at a friend's house while she flew down there. Hanging out with a few kids in his neighborhood, decide to go walk around Innawoods. End up in a blueberry thicket just before the muskeg. Just messing around, playing war with the 5 of us. Suddenly hear what sounds like cooing coming from what smelled like skunk cabbage. We all head towards it. Very small gorilla looking thing. Get closer and realize thing has no face, just a blank white area where the face would normally go on a person. Older friend of ours puts his hand out and moves closer to it and it does the same. Its fingers are webbed. Closer he gets the more time seems to slow down. Eventually time just fucking stops. Looking at what is practically the creation of Adam but a middle school boy with weird ape thing. Suddenly time fast forwards and we're sprinting out of the forest towards the house screaming our heads off. Make it to the road and keep running, eventually we stop and turn around. Big ass one is standing on the edge of the forest just looking at us. What are you guys running from? Fucking jump out of our skins. It's a few girls we went to school with, one I had a mega crush on. Look back and the big one is hauling it back into the forest towards the muskeg. We all just play it cool and say nothing. You guys look really scared though. We try to laugh it off and say just messing around. Spend the rest of the afternoon jumping on a trampoline with the girls. Later on end up back at the house. Ask my friends if we just imagined that or if it really happened. No one will look at each other or say anything. Friend's mom ends up ordering us pizza even though she's a health freak because she thinks I'm sad about my Grandma and we're just really tired from playing outside and everybody needs a pick-me-up. She asks why we didn't respond on the walkie earlier. Realize in the fracas we dropped the fucking thing. Tells us we have to find it tomorrow. Fuck that. Temp. Eat our pizza and head upstairs to sleep. Except no one can sleep. Hear what sounds like something crawling on the roof. One guy says probably just a cat. Eventually hear a rhythmic tapping on the window. No one fucking moves, no one even really breathes. Eventually it stops and then crawls down. We're all scared shitless but manage to pass out somehow. Eat bran flakes and granola for breakfast because healthy. Walk outside to find the walkie we had no intention of looking for. Walkie is just sitting on the front porch. Fast forward to summer 2008. Have since moved away but mom wants to go there on vacation since one of my aunts lives there now. Being sweaty teenager on the verge of graduation, I chalk up my previous experience to being an imaginative child. Also being a sweaty teenager, I don't want to go, so drag the fuck out of my feet and demand being allowed my laptop so I can play video in the hotel. Mom agrees. Be there a couple days, doing stuff during the day and playing games in the hotel at night. Only dark between 2 and 4 a.m. so can't really sleep anyway, even with a blanket over the window. One night look at the clock, 2:27 a.m. Computer freezes up. Try to force restart but nothing happens. Try again and again. piece of shit.jpg. Go and get some water to cool off before I break something. Look at clock again, 2:27 a.m. Think no fucking way. Then hear the rapping at the window. Look at clock again, 2:27 a.m. Realization hits. They remember. Robert Muldoon. Say nothing, do nothing, just sit motionless. Tapping stops. A single scratch goes from one part of the window to the other. Laptop suddenly shuts off. Look at clock, 4:19 a.m. Haven't been back to Alaska since, nor do I ever plan to return. Fuck that and fuck you.
Carrie story/urban legend thread? Here's one that happened to me a few months back. I want to stress that you can literally Google this incident if you want proof, although the articles I've been reading have been highly sanitized, which is part of the reason I'm posting this. Be me. South African. Going on a trip to Botswana. My sister is marrying a guy who's a game ranger and I'm going on this trip to spend time with the dude and get to know him. I'm supposed to be the best man at the wedding even though we barely know each other. I arrive after a really long drive. Spend first day drinking and driving dirt bikes around, generally having a great time. Next day, sister's fiancé suggests we go driving around the outskirts of the Okavango Delta in an attempt to see some wildlife. I agree. We go driving around and manage to spot some giraffes, leopard, hippos, and some different birds. Really fun but insanely fucking hot. No elephants spotted, this comes up later. Eventually we head back to the place we're staying at each night. We start to cook and drink. Sister's fiancé, I'll just call him John, gets a call as the sun's going down. I notice how weirded out he is by what he's being told on the phone. He hangs up but definitely seems freaked out as we eat dinner. I ask what's up but John just dismisses it. Says it's nothing serious. After dinner we start drinking more and more. John starts ranting about his boss. That's who was on the phone. Says they found some dead elephants and he wants John to go check it out. John tells him it's too dark to see anything but he'll go tomorrow. John apologizes to me, tells me he'll be busy working tomorrow. I say it's no problem. John, kinda drunk, feels really bad, says we're supposed to be bonding but now he's leaving me in a shitty little chalet with no company. Night goes on. After a few more beers John tells me that I should come with him tomorrow. I'm reluctant, I don't love the idea of inspecting dead elephants. John insists, says they'll go by helicopter. Says it'll be much better than driving in the heat. I agree to go along. Next day, we eat breakfast and head to a small airstrip. Helicopter looks rickety as fuck but I feel like complaining would be rude. There are lots of pre-flight procedures and we end up taking off just after midday. We fly around for about an hour, able to search a huge amount of area really quickly. There's me, John, another ranger, a dude who I think was a ranger in training, and the pilot. John and other ranger have tranq rifles ready in case they need to inspect a live elephant up close. Finally spot something. About 3 elephants lying in the sun. We land a few meters away and hop out. The stench is horrible. Flies are everywhere. The corpses are half rotten and half eaten. I think it's weird that 3 elephants are dead together, but not too shocking beyond that. John and others are discussing something. Conversation seemed pretty intense. I try to join the conversation so I don't seem like the silent oddest of the group lurking in the background. So I'm guessing some poachers shot them, huh? Everyone looks at me and they all seem annoyed. I think they were pissed that John invited a normie who didn't know shit along with them. Eventually John says, "Doesn't seem like poachers, the elephants still have their tusks." I hadn't thought of that and now I felt like a dumbass. They keep inspecting the bodies and both rangers seemed really interested in one of the smaller ones. It was lying on its side but its face was pointed at an odd angle towards the ground, like it had been trying to stick its head in the ground. Finally the other ranger suggests we keep looking to see if there are any others. We get back up into the air and fly around for about another hour. Ranger seems really troubled but we see nothing. We land and they have another conversation about what to do next while I just sit awkwardly in the helicopter with my feet hanging out. We have some lunch and John informs me that we're gonna do one more search before heading back as we only have fuel for about another hour. We were flying back and forth so we were only about 45 minutes from the airstrip. Before we finish eating I overhear the ranger tell John that the smaller elephant really seemed like it had a broken neck. I blurt out, "How the fuck does that happen?" Ranger just glares at me and keeps eating. We finish eating and take off again and continue searching. After about 30 minutes the pilot tells us we're heading back and turns towards home, but after just 5 minutes the ranger in training starts pointing and shouting. Lying on the ground near a clearing of trees are about a dozen dead elephants. The sun's going down and the shadows from their corpses are easy to see stretching along the ground. We land nearby and make our way over. Smell is even worse than last time and the bodies are ruined. I'm not much of a nature lover so I don't know exactly what animals can do to other animals. Even so, I could tell some bodies had been picked at by scavengers. Their stomachs were torn open and intestines spewed out everywhere. Again, all the tusks were present. I asked John if maybe somebody had shot at them just for the fuck of it. He says probably not. To kill this many you'd need a helicopter to fire from above, and when that happens, like when they're tranked, they form a circle around the younger ones, but these bodies were all spread out over a distance of a kilometer or two. Like they had been running away in a full-on panic. He then pointed out the state of some of the other bodies. A couple had feet and legs missing, which may be possible after being chewed on for a few days, but I can't imagine why some lions and hyenas would go for the legs and feet first while leaving the stomach untouched. After some inspecting we all ended up standing around the body of a smaller elephant, maybe a teenager, who was missing its head. I don't mean its skin and flesh had been picked off by birds and wild dogs, I mean its head, neck, and right shoulder were gone, like they had been pulled off. Also, while this body was smaller, it was still probably a couple tons and twice the height of a human. I actually wondered if someone had magically fed this thing a stick of dynamite or something. At this point John and the other ranger are swearing and ranting about how fucked this all is, but I think the rest of us all knew that they were using anger to cover up their growing confusion and worry. After I let them vent a little I ask what we do now. The other ranger snaps at me and says we're gonna go home and try figure out how to explain this to the Department of Environmental Affairs. We all start to head back to the helicopter when the ranger in training says, "What about the hole?" We all turn and look at him and John says, "What hole?" The ranger in training starts leading us towards a small hill while saying, "I thought you all saw it when we flew overhead." Sure enough, there in the side of this hill is a hole, dug at maybe a 15 or 20 degree angle downward. This thing is fucking massive. It looks like a mole's hill except that it's as big as a subway tunnel. I ask John what I'm looking at, still thinking that this is some natural phenomena I've never heard about, but he just mumbles that he has no idea. Finally the pilot asks if we're going in. WTF Pepe.jpg. What did this man just say? Just look at him like he's a fucking crazy person. Why the fuck would we go in there? Luckily the other ranger says, nah, it's almost dark, let's just take some pictures and get back, we'll report this and let someone else figure it out. I'm beginning to like this dude. We start walking back. The pilot and I take our time checking the bodies some more because the other three are taking pictures and there's no hurry, although I did feel really creeped out, I didn't say anything. Eventually we all end up in the helicopter except for the ranger who has climbed up a body and is taking his last pictures. For some reason I only noticed then how silent it was. No animals except flies, which I thought was weird considering how much raw meat was present. As the ranger jumps off the body and starts heading back, we all hear a massive grating noise. Sounded like something huge was shifting against the sand. I immediately assume one of the elephants is still alive and is trying to stand up. We all pile out of the helicopter and make our way towards the noise. I can't see anything because the light's fading fast and the horizon is dotted with giant elephant carcasses. I notice John and the others are making their way up some bodies and I jump onto a nearby, fairly intact corpse to get a vantage point. As I crest the elephant, never thought I'd type that sentence, I stare out at the black silhouettes lying on the ground against the afternoon sky. For a while I see nothing, but suddenly my eyes pick up movement. At first I think it's something coming out of the hole, like a fucking worm from Dune or something, and I tactically shit my pants. Then I notice that it seems to be an elephant trying to drag itself into the hole. John and the other ranger are already down the carcasses and heading for the hole, and the rest of us are following. I'm not sure why, maybe we just wanted to see a living elephant after all these dead ones. I won't pretend it was rational and I can't speak for the others, but I just felt like if we saw this thing up close we might be able to get some understanding of what happened here. We all come around the side of a truly massive dead elephant and stare towards the entrance to the hole. At this point the light was dying fast and a lot of detail was lost in the shadow of the tunnel, but I swear to God I saw enough to know I wasn't imagining anything. Standing at the entrance to the hole is a person, crouched over like a gorilla. The hair was long and matted and they were completely naked, but the real problem was their size. This person was crouched over the elephant. Their body was actually slightly cramped in this subway-sized hole. The elephant's body looked like big gray dog next to this literal giant. Its proportions were completely fucked. Its top half was stretched out and spidery with arms as long as a truck, folded so that it could fit inside the tunnel, ending in these wiry fingers with needle-like claws. Meanwhile its bottom half was stubby and emaciated. This thing's legs were human enough in appearance, though each was the size of a fully grown man, but they were so withered compared to the rest of it that they almost seemed vestigial. We came to see it just as it was getting back into the tunnel. What had seemed like an elephant crawling into the hole had actually been an elephant body being dragged by the leg into the earth. We all stood in abject horror as this thing pulled at the elephant's corpse like a sack of potatoes. We hadn't made a sound, but at some point it turned its head around, not like it heard something but rather like it was a wild animal checking its surroundings from time to time. Its eyes immediately snapped towards us. This thing's face was so fucked up. The eyes were white and milky, but I could still tell that it saw us. The nose was upturned like a bat and its mouth hung slightly open as it breathed, revealing massive slab-like teeth like something you'd see in a hippo's mouth. They were all crooked and some protruded out at odd angles, but they all looked as hard as steel, and I could immediately imagine them tearing through the legs and heads of the bodies we had seen so far. The strangest part was the shape of its head. It seemed disfigured and bulbous, like a fetus's skull. It also bent in on one side more than the other. The best way I can describe it is like the lady from the painting in it, except wider and obviously far larger. The skin was veiny, and although its shoulders and back were covered in dirt, it was as white as a sheet, almost to the point of being translucent. The skin around its eyes had enough wrinkles to almost act like eyebrows, which gave it a very surprised, slightly confused look. After a split second of confusion, this thing's face contorts into a look of absolute rage. It lets out this awful fucking roar. Sounds almost like the scream a deaf person might make, sort of low and monotone, but it's loud enough that my hands instinctively slam into my ears to try block out the sound. We all start sprinting towards the helicopter. John's shouting something, but my ears are ringing, and it's too muffled to make out. We all climb into the helicopter in complete terror. strap myself in and look back towards the hole. This giant fucking monster is clawing its way towards us. It's clearly moving as fast as it can, but it's still pretty slow. Its back legs are dragging along limply and it's only moving by clawing at the ground and elephant corpses. It moves like someone who's paralyzed from the waist down. We all just sit there petrified and stare at it while the pilot starts the helicopter. I remember watching it grab at one of the larger elephants to try use it as an anchor to pull itself along. The elephant corpse literally slid towards it. Like, a fucking elephant corpse wasn't heavy enough for it to use as a weight. The helicopter starts to lift off and this thing reaches out for us. It's still a long way off, but it came a hell of a lot closer than I would have thought possible. Its whole body is probably longer than 2 school buses placed end to end. Ranger fires his tranq gun at it, but I honestly didn't even see if it hit or not, although I'd be amazed if he missed that thing. We don't stay around. Pilot turns the helicopter towards home and we shoot back faster than I thought possible. I think I heard another dull roar as we flew away, but my ears were still ringing too much to be certain. Rest of the night was a blur. I don't remember much of the conversations after we landed, but I wasn't content with being back at the chalet. Just felt like that thing was still crawling towards us in the night and would eventually smash through the little wooden chalet I was in. Told John the first was leaving right away and drove for about 6 hours before pulling into a petrol station and falling asleep in my car. When I woke up the next morning, I kept driving until I got home. Got in the shower and just stood there under the water for about an hour. Eventually I called John and we spoke for a while about everything that happened. Apparently they had got a massive group together to go search the area, but when they arrived they only found 8 bodies and the hole had partially collapsed. Over the next few weeks John told me about the attempts to track down whatever that thing was, but eventually they gave up and some of the other rangers started to think that maybe we all just had a few too many beers and came up with all this shit. Apparently he had quite a few arguments over what happened that night. Elephant corpses keep showing up near those holes, but nobody's willing to go walking into them to see what's inside. After another week or two John quit that job and now he's working as a delivery man. You're probably wondering why you haven't heard about this. Well, you can find some stories about it, but most of them attribute the deaths to some kind of pandemic that spread through the population. You'll also notice that they omit most of the pictures. They'll only show you pictures of the more intact elephants so that you don't wonder how such massive creatures can get pulled limb from limb, and they'll never show you the holes dug in and out of the ground. Here's an article though in case you're interested: https://www.theguardian.com/environment/2020/sep/030/y-r-of-mass-die-offs-ace.
Not really sure how best to tell this story, so I'll post it in small chunks at a time, I guess. Around 13 to 14 at the time. Walk dogs on the same route around the village. Always walked down a real long lane that stretched between backyards of opposite houses. Garages and sheds ran along one side, brick walls along the other. Halfway through the lane was an old run-down car, with a little black dome thing on the dashboard. Said dome was constantly blinking red, either an alarm or a camera, I imagine. In front of the car was a real dilapidated Horsebox. Pick not the same one, but very similar. Rusted to all hell, holes and open areas were heavily boarded up with wood and sheet metal. Every time I walked down this lane, dogs would constantly run to the Horsebox and frantically start sniffing around it and consistently pull back on the leash as I'd try and pull them away. Thought nothing of it, until I noticed other dogs would behave the same way around it. Horsebox began to gain my curiosity. Forgot pick. Don't at me. Began to take dogs out more often just to see if they'd eventually lose interest in the Horsebox. They didn't. If anything, they got more persistent, would start dragging me towards it, sometimes growl at it, or me, when I'd try and pull them away. Decided to try and take a look for myself, wouldn't hurt. Started circling the box as best I could, looking for some kind of opening. I noticed a relatively loose piece of wood towards the top of the box, being held in place by a couple of rusty nails. Curiosity got the better of me and I tried to get a peek inside by pulling the wood just a little. Decided probably not the best idea after I heard footsteps coming towards the gate beside the box. Yanked the dogs away and hurried to the end of the lane. Could have been nothing, didn't bother looking back. Few days passed and I needed to take another look. Horsebox now had my attention. Started going out with the dogs later in the evening, quieter time, less likely to be interrupted I thought. Sun was setting earlier, this was late summer so days began getting shorter but had plenty of daylight to start snooping. So I took the dogs on their walk, same route, just at a different time. Started coming up towards the lane but my plans changed when I saw some old man stood directly in front of the horse box, just staring at it. He had a dog with him and it was the first dog I'd seen which hadn't gone apeshit when next to said horse box. Thought to myself maybe it was just one big coincidence that every dog I'd seen acted the same way. Continued to watch the fella from afar, pretended to pick up dog shit so I'd look relatively normal if he took a glance at me and saw me hanging around. The old man then began toying with the horse box, touching the wood, adjusting the sheet metal. He stood doing this for a while, hell I'm not even sure how long as I was stood there picking up dog shit. After a while he just stood and stared at it for several more minutes before opening the gate beside it and walking into his backyard. That makes a whole lot of sense, I thought, explains why the dog wasn't showing any interest with the thing. More days passed and the summer break was slowly coming to a close. Decided to make it my mission to now find out what was inside the horse box that got the dogs all spooked before school started again. Sun probably set around 7 p.m. and I decided to go and have another look. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out. I left the dogs at home this time. So the time had come I thought. No pussyfooting around it this time. No dogs. No distractions. Come up to the horse box, never really affected me in any way like it did with dogs. Whole different story when it's dark, no street lamps around, and the only light illuminating this piece of junk was a dim flashlight. Actually started feeling a little nauseous, still not quite sure whether it was this inanimate object that was causing me to feel this way, or me thinking that maybe I was breaking the law in some way. Decided to nut up and circled the thing, but couldn't find the loose wood I'd moved about a week or so ago. Old man had clearly made some improvements. There was more nails in the wood. More sheet metal had been applied. Something was in this box that he didn't want people to see, his defense had leveled up tenfold. Started thinking to myself that maybe I wasn't best equipped for such a task and maybe I'd need some tools to get the job done. Those thoughts were quickly diminished when I noticed that an area had been untouched by Tim Allen from Home Improvement. I managed to pull myself up to the open part of the box by positioning myself awkwardly on the wheel arch. Probably should have used a headlamp or something in hindsight, because trying to keep myself balanced, upright and try and pull myself up to eye level with the open area was a chore with one free hand, flashlight at the ready in the other. Alas, I stabilized myself in a comfortable position and got my light to shine inside. Not sure if it was because I was elevated, but some very bizarre smell which I still to this day can't put my finger suddenly hit me. A stench I'd never smelled before now hit me like a train. I guess this was why the dogs went bananas around the thing. I still couldn't make out what was inside, so I tried to lift myself higher. In doing so, I pulled a piece of wood from the box, dropped my flashlight inside and slipped. So the fall clearly made a whole lot of noise, but not enough to disturb the peace, I'd say. But being the ignorant, set in my ways kinda guy that I am, I completely forgot about the little blinking red light in the car beside the box. Pretty sure it was a camera. So I got back up, and went for another look. Lo and behold, the footsteps started coming. And they sounded in a hurry. I started to panic and didn't know what to do or where to go. I kind of just froze. The gate behind me swung open and in an instant I was now face to face with the guy. He was old. Like he looked real old. Leathery skin, a dirty mustache, deep, dark circles under his eyes. He didn't say a word. He grabbed me by both shoulders, and somewhat gently pushed me against the horse box. With my back up against it, I had nowhere to look but straight at him. It didn't even feel as though he was looking at me. I know it sounds cliché, but it did feel like he was looking right through me, like the only thing he could see was the horse box. He stood like this for several seconds before pulling out some kind of disposable camera and taking a snapshot of what must have been a very pale face of mine. He then fixed his focus to actually look at me and said something along the lines of silly boy or stupid boy, and he shook his head. Pretty sure he went to say something else as he looked at his disposable camera, but I decided I wasn't in the mood to make small talk and I legged it back down the lane, back the way I came. Fair to say I didn't want to go back to this lane, and I avoided it religiously for several months. Just after Christmas I decided to take an early morning walk down the lane just to see if Tim Allen had made any more improvements. The horse box was nowhere to be seen, and neither was the car with the cameras/alarm. I felt as though a weight had been lifted off my chest knowing this old guy had relocated his creepy junk somewhere else. I still didn't like the thought of this guy potentially having a photograph of me lying around somewhere, but the thought of him being out of the area was good enough. I never saw the old guy again, nor did I ever see that horse box again, and walking my dogs was far easier without them being constantly distracted by it. Around the end of January, I was taking a walk with a friend to the park and we took the lane as a shortcut. The entire backyard area of Horsebox house was cornered off with police tape, and several officers were stood around the area. I looked into the yard and there were men in white hazmat suits walking up and down his garden, and several holes had been dug along the patch of grass. I don't know where the old man went, and I still to this day don't know what was going on in his backyard, and I don't think I'll ever find out. Alright/x/ I occasionally lurk here but never have anything to contribute to, but I saw this thread and read the old pasta and it freaked me the fuck out. I don't know if this was a goatman, but here's my story. Summer 2008. Just graduated last year, fuck yeah. Live with a couple friends. Decide to go camping to celebrate my graduation. Friends join me, Seth and Amanda. They were dating at the time. Truck full of camping gear, going deep into East Texas woods. 3-hour drive, kill me.jpg. Finally get there, set up camp. First night totally uneventful, had a fire, cooked some food, smoked some weed, all was good. Second night camping, spent whole day hiking around area. Tired as fuck. Avi. Crawl into personal tent, Seth and Amanda disappear for some alone time. Hear couple screams. Seth must be railin' that shit. Couple seconds later hear both of them run back into camp. Anon, get the fuck up now, something is out there. Ask what happened. Something was moving in the bushes and screamed at us, didn't sound human. Say it's just a fox, tell them vixens scream like that, start to calm down. Smoke more, turn on truck for a bit and listen to music. Everything chill, turn off truck, get back into tent. Like 2:30 a.m. now, pass out. This is where it all gets weird, and neither Seth or Amanda can explain this. Next morning, Seth shaking me awake, looks super worried. WTF, let me sleep. Anon, someone broke into your truck last night. Instantly awake, shotgun in hand. All 4 doors on truck are open, interior has mud and grass, Dave look at ground for footprints, nothing there at all. Anon, you didn't hear anything last night? No, did you? Amanda woke me up cause she saw the lights from the cab, figured you were smoking a bowl. Freak out a little, decide our last night there we would all stay up. Spend whole day looking round camp for signs of intruder, nothing. The whole day we were really nervous and didn't really talk about our plan to stay up. We took naps around 6 p.m. and woke up around 8:30 just as sun went down. Operation Nightwatch. Nothing going on, all in Seth's big tent smoking. About 1 a.m. hear same scream as other night. Amanda turns on waterworks, silently crying, and saying we should leave. Hell no, I wanna scare this faggot for fucking up my truck. Screams go on for an hour. Finally stops, Seth and I load shotguns and step outside tents. Put tons of grass and shit on fire and turn on our flashlights. Can see like maybe 20 yards around campsite. Anon, look. See eyes peering from woods. Fire warning shot and say GTFO in loud voice. It fucking screams and takes off into woods. WTF nope.avi.jpeg.mp4.gif. Start throwing shit in truck and add more grass/trash to fire so we can see. About 3 a.m., 80% packed, just tents left. Amanda in truck having full-blown panic attack. Screaming starts again, kinda far away. Lightspeed tent packing, just throwing everything into bed of truck. Screams getting closer. Panic and fire a shot in its direction. If anyone has ever used a cutting torch, you know that sharp hot metal smell. Start smelling hot metal mixed with weak old food. Gagging me, it's so bad. About to get in truck, putting water on fire. Look up from fire, see eyes in fading light. It's less than 15 yards from me, freak the fuck out. Shotgun in truck, FML. Run and jump into truck. 3-point turn, truck now facing road we drove up. And I shit you not, this is visible from the waist up standing off the road. It had antlers, like a buck, and stood probably 7 to 8 feet tall, and it had fucking massive shoulders. I couldn't really see the head because of the shadows.
Hi X, I am a casual lurker, I am Venezuelan, yes, socialism is the devil but please no politics, I don't care if you disagree, and I come to share and ask about experiences with trickster beings and shapeshifters and spirits who can disguise themselves. I know the Japanese culture is full of these fucks and plenty of animal spirits can transform with ease, but I really wonder how much can entities mimic us and what categories of beings can and can't do so. Have you had similar experiences with things pretending to be you or your family? My story below. OP here, my story is this one. Be me 12 YRS old at the time, my brother was 15. Family owned a big but run-down colonial-style house in a town in the province, probably belonged to a low-tier landowner of the latifundio era. Grandpa wanted to have it become an inn, but the area never got developed and we simply used it to vacation ourselves. Me and bro were always so freaked out at night that we started sleeping in the same room. You had to walk across a scary as hell colonial hallway and across the patio to get to the bathroom of this house. Bro and I hated to go to the bathroom alone at night. I always annoyed the crap out of him, so he would come with me and he was cool about it. One night my brother is woken up by me shaking him and pulling out his blanket. He squints and sees me hanging by the open door waiting for him. He is sleepy as fuck and is so used to this happening that he just plays along, gets up and follows me. He never really stared too closely in what he thought was me. He saw my figure getting kind of lost in the shadows of the hallway. He heard my exact voice telling him to come, and when I vanished he simply thought I went ahead and had a bad rush to pee or something. When he got to the middle of the patio he realized there was no one in the bathroom to the other side. Door was open, lights out. The other rooms were closed. He kinda looked around for me and thought I was pulling a prank, trying to scare him. WTF Anon, where did you go? He then heard me whisper loudly, come Anon's brother, come, let's enter the garden. He saw me heavily shaded but still perfectly silhouetted making hand gestures for him to enter the garden area with him. This was a separate area leaving the house. Not actually a garden but some backwoods of the property outside of the house and joined with the hill. My grandpa planted some mango trees and shit. There was nothing there other than that. My brother was having none of this. You are crazy or what Anon? Get the fuck here. Or I'll wake up our parents so they kick your ass. You are going to fall into that stupid pit or get bitten by a snake asshole. You will get us both into serious shit. The figure that looked like me kept calling him and making gestures, so he got pretty pissed, turned back the way to our room and figured I would get scared of being left alone in the patio, so I would rush back behind him. He didn't heard me following though. Imagine the face on my brother when he saw me dead asleep in our room when he returned. It was not me the whole time. He screamed like a bitch, woke everyone up and was close to tears. My father and grandpa went into the backwoods with lanterns. They found no one. You can't even access the property from there. You'd have to jump from a helicopter or something to enter the house from the back. It was not the only time me and other family members heard and saw each other calling us. We always had this shit happen every time we vacationed there. We found out the next owner killed himself after the government expropriated all his investments. There is nothing there now but squatters and the town is ran by a criminal gang in Santeros. What the hell was that?